It's a Tuesday morning. You walk into work, coffee in hand, head down, just trying to get to your station. And then you see it. Maybe it's a supervisor doing work that belongs to a bargaining unit member. Maybe it's a safety protocol being ignored because, well, we're behind schedule. Or maybe it's just the whisper network lighting up because someone got fired for something that got another person a warning just last week. And in that moment, the question isn't usually legalistic, it's visceral. It's, wait a minute, what are we actually paying dues for? What is this thing, this union, actually supposed to do? Welcome back to the show. Today we are stripping it down to the studs. We're not talking about political endorsements or the history of the AFL CIO in the 1950s. We are talking about the mechanics of power on the shop floor. What is the actual function of a union? Why does enforcement matter more than intentions? And how does the concept of precedent literally stand between a worker and unfair termination? To help us tear this apart, I'm joined by Eloise, who has spent years studying labor relations and the nuts and bolts of contract enforcement. Eloise, good to have you.
It's great to be here, Noah, and I love that we're starting with that visceral question because I think there is a massive drift happening right now. A lot of members, especially younger ones who maybe haven't been through a strike or a major grievance battle, they see the union as almost like a subscription service.
Like Netflix for job security?
Exactly. You pay your monthly fee, and in exchange, you expect a vague sense of protection. But that's a fundamental misunderstanding of the mechanics. A union isn't a service you buy, it's a legal instrument you wield. And if you don't wield it, it rusts.
So let's define the instrument. If you ask a random member on the floor, what is the union supposed to do? You might get answers like, get me a raise or keep me from getting fired. Are those wrong?
They aren't wrong, but they are incomplete. They are outcomes, not the function. The core function of a union, the absolute bedrock, is to enforce the contract. That is it. The contract is a legally binding document that sets the rules of the game. The union exists to protect workers by enforcing those rules. I want to be really specific here. The union does not exist to protect management. It doesn't exist to protect positions or titles. And frankly, it doesn't exist to protect egos. It exists to protect safety, enforce agreed upon standards, and defend members from retaliation.
That distinction about not protecting management seems obvious, but I feel like in practice it gets blurry. You hear things like, well, we have to be partners with the company, or we need the company to survive so we have jobs. At what point does partnership become a failure of duty?
It becomes a failure the moment enforcement stops. Look, labor history is pretty clear on this. The National Labor Relations Act of 1935 wasn't passed so everyone could be friends. It was passed to manage conflict. When a union steward sees a violation, let's say forced overtime that violates the seniority list, and they look the other way because they don't want to rock the boat with management, they aren't being a partner. They are effectively nullifying the contract. When enforcement disappears, the violation doesn't just happen once, it becomes the new norm. It's called past practice in labor law. If you let the company ignore a rule for 6 months, you have effectively rewritten the contract to say that rule doesn't matter anymore.
That is a terrifying concept. So inaction isn't just laziness, it's actually amending the contract by default.
Precisely. Silence is consent in the world of contracts. If the contract says shifts must be posted 48 hours in advance, and the manager posts it 12 hours in advance, and the union says nothing, guess what? The rule is now 12 hours. You've given away a right that people fought for.
This brings us to the second big pillar we need to discuss: enforcement versus excuses. Because I've heard the excuses. Oh, the company's going through a transition, or there's nothing we can do, they have the management rights clause.
Right, the management rights clause is the boogeyman. Yes, every contract has a section saying management has the right to direct the workforce, but that right is not absolute. It is bounded by every other article in the agreement. An excuse is just a narrative wrapper for failure.
Give me an example of an excuse versus enforcement in a real world scenario. Let's say safety.
Okay, let's take a manufacturing setting or even a warehouse. The contract almost certainly has a health and safety clause. Let's say there's a machine with a faulty guard or a vehicle with bad brakes. An excuse sounds like this: well, parts are on back order, and if we tag it out, production stops, and the company will crack down on our break times in retaliation.
That sounds incredibly realistic. It sounds like pragmatism.
It sounds like pragmatism, but it's actually capitulation. That is an excuse. Enforcement looks like this: the contract states we have the right to a safe workplace. This equipment is unsafe. We are filing a grievance. We are tagging it out. And if you retaliate against us for safety, we are filing an unfair labor practice charge with the labor board. See the difference? One relies on the company's benevolence, the other relies on the worker's power.
But isn't there a fear element there? You mentioned retaliation. If I'm a steward or just a rank and file member and I push for enforcement, I'm painting a target on my back. How does a union address that reality?
That fear is real. But here is the paradox: you're actually safer when the union is aggressive than when it is passive. When a union is passive, management learns that they can pick people off one by one. When a union aggressively enforces the contract, management learns that every single disciplinary action will be a headache for them. It will cost them time, paperwork, and legal fees. Enforcement creates a shield. Apathy creates a target rich environment.
So the hassle factor is actually a strategic asset for the union?
100%. If firing someone unjustly takes 5 minutes, they'll do it all day. If it takes 5 months of hearings, documentation, and arbitration because the union fights every inch, they will think twice. Members pay dues for that friction. They pay dues for the union to be the wall that stops the abuse.
I want to pivot to the third concept, which I think is the most misunderstood: discipline and precedent. You mentioned picking people off. We often see the scenario: worker A is late 3 times and gets a verbal warning. Worker B is late 3 times and gets terminated. And the explanation is usually, well, worker B had a bad attitude or some subjective metric.
This is the kangaroo court scenario, and it is the death knell of solidarity if allowed to stand.
Break down why precedent is so technical and vital here. Why isn't it enough to just say, that's not fair?
Because fair is subjective, precedent is evidence. In labor arbitration, there is a concept called just cause. There are 7 tests of just cause, developed by arbitrator Carol Doherty back in the 1960s. One of the most critical tests is: was the rule applied partially or without discrimination?
If the union can prove that 5 other people did the exact same thing and weren't fired, then the company cannot fire worker B. It doesn't matter if the boss hates worker B. It doesn't matter if worker B is annoying. If the precedent is a warning, then a termination is illegal under the contract. This goes back to your point about the union not protecting management or egos. If the union lets worker B get fired because, well, maybe the union steward doesn't like worker B either, what happens?
Then the union has just handed the company a loaded gun to use against everyone else. Once you allow the company to deviate from precedent, to skip steps in discipline because they don't like a guy, you have destroyed the protection for the good employee, too. Next month, maybe they decide they don't like you. And when you point to the rules, they'll say, "What rules? We fired worker B for this last month and you didn't say a word."
So, protecting the bad apple, if we want to use that loaded term, is actually about protecting the integrity of the system for everyone?
Exactly. It is not about defending the behavior, it is about defending the process. In the legal system, everyone deserves a defense attorney, not because we love crime, but because if the state can lock up a criminal without a trial, they can lock up you without a trial. In the workplace, if the company can fire a slacker without following the steps of progressive discipline, they can fire a high performer just to cut costs. Precedent is the only thing that keeps discipline from becoming arbitrary and retaliatory.
I want to touch on the cultural impact of this. When a union stops educating its members on these things, when they stop explaining why they are fighting for the so called bad apple, or why they are filing a grievance over a 15-minute schedule change, what happens to the culture of the workforce?
Cynicism takes over. You start hearing phrases like, "the union is in bed with the company," or "the union is useless." And honestly, if the education isn't there, they're right to feel that way. When members don't understand the strategy, they just see the chaos. Education restores clarity, it re anchors the membership.
Re anchoring seems like the right term. It feels like we've drifted. So, if we're looking at a roadmap for fixing this, it seems to start with basic literacy, knowing what the contract actually says.
It starts with reading the book. It sounds boring, but knowledge is the only leverage you have. If a manager lies to you and says, I can force you to stay for a double shift, and you don't know that Article 14 says he can't, you lose. You lose right there in the conversation. An educated membership is terrifying to a bad management team because they can't get away with the little violations. And if they can't get away with the little ones, they never build up the confidence to try the big ones.
It's the broken windows theory, but for labor rights.
That's a great analogy. If you let them break the window on overtime distribution, eventually they'll burn down the house on healthcare benefits.
We've covered a lot of ground. The definition of the union not as a service, but as an enforcement mechanism, the danger of excuses masking capitulation, and the vital role of precedent in discipline. If you had to leave the listeners, specifically the rank and file members, with one action item, one thing they should change about how they view their union tomorrow morning, what would it be?
Stop waiting for the union to save you and start realizing you are the enforcement mechanism. If you see a violation, report it. If you see a discrepancy in discipline, speak up. The union isn't a third party, it's the collective will of the people in the room. If you are silent, the union is silent. So get loud, ask questions, and demand that the contract be followed to the letter. Not because you're difficult, but because that piece of paper is the only thing standing between you and at will employment.
That piece of paper is legally binding, but only if you make it so. Eloise, this has been an incredibly clarifying conversation. Thank you for cutting through the noise.
My pleasure, Noah. Let's bring it back.
And thank you for listening. If you're heading into a shift, take a look at that contract. It's not just a booklet, it's your shield. Until next time, stay safe and stay educated.